Americans are seeking strong leadership to steer the country forward and revitalize the economy. There is much important work ahead, and I'm hopeful that he can do a lot of that. Hello. Welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. We've got a lot to talk about. It's been a big last week, and we've got more things upcoming. So let's get right to it, okay? The first thing is Trump wins White House. In the news, after a contentious election season, Donald J. Trump, the 45th president, has won the presidency to be the 47th president, securing enough swing states to reach the 270 electoral college votes needed to defeat Vice President Kamala Harris. Okay, my take on this is, first, congratulations to President Trump on his victory. I'm glad to see that it happened that night where we didn't have to wait, days or weeks or months or something. Americans are seeking strong leadership to steer the country forward and revitalize the economy. There is much important work ahead, and I'm hopeful that he can do a lot of that. There were a lot of key things that happened in the first administration, particularly the Trump tax cuts, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, right? The deregulation that was put in place. Those were huge to unleash economic growth. There was also criminal justice reforms with the First Step Act. There were other things that I think were positive, but some areas of concern that I'll always point you in the right direction on, right, is that we do need to worry about these tariffs. The tariffs are a major cost to Americans, and I'm all in favor of eliminating the personal income tax. Don't get me wrong. I really want to do that. We should repeal the 16th Amendment that imposed this bad tax on us. But at the same time, when you're trying to shift to tariffs, there's just not as much to tax. And at the end of the day, and if we want to bring in the same amount of $2.2 trillion of personal income taxes, which again is way too much, but we need to cut spending, which is the main problem here, I don't really see a path to eliminating income taxes. So what we'll end up having is higher tariffs and higher income taxes. That's not the situation that we want. Just like in Texas and other states, what I advocate for is eliminating property taxes, but, expanding the sales tax base if you want, or using surplus dollars above a strict spending limit. That's even a better surplus trigger that you can put in place. Those are the types of things, if you want to eliminate a tax, then go for it. But let's not ratchet up two at the same time. And oh, by the way, the tariffs and the power of the purse in general should be by Congress and not by any president. I think Congress, like Senator Rand Paul has advocated for, they should repeal this idea that a president can impose tariffs. That's not up to them to decide. This is really about Congress and not a president. So I think that's going to be a big issue. And of course, the other big issue that's pro-growth, every time I keep saying this, is cut spending. I like the idea of Elon Musk coming in to consider this. I like even a private sector sort of innovative way of doing an independent efficiency audit like the Grace Commission that Reagan had back in the 1980s. I'll be glad to be on that to try to find cuts, because there's so much that we need to be cutting from the federal government. And then that way, I guess if you wanted to fund things with tariffs, that's a much smaller form of government, then great. Although I don't think it's a very good form of taxation at the end of the day, because remember, it's all about costing Americans in the process. And we also cannot fall prey to the quote unquote new right, the NatCon direction. This was one of my concerns I had with Vice President, it's soon to be J.D. Vance, who's currently a senator, is his more NatCon new right direction of, labor unions having more power, having government solve more problems, having the right people in power. This is not how conservatism or libertarianism should be. And I think that's a wrong direction for the country. However, if they can really focus on tax cuts, cutting spending and cutting regulations and having more free trade with other countries, especially our allies, I think we can have a superior economy, just like we had back in 2018 and 2019, even with the detriments of too much government spending and too high of tariffs or any tariffs at all. So I'm going to try to be supportive as possible, but I'm going to call balls and strikes throughout this process as well. So keep joining me each and every week. All right. Number two here is Fed's control of the bond market. So in the news, the Fed cut interest rates again recently, this past week, okay? The 10-year Treasury yield has surged by approximately 70 basis points since the Federal Reserve's recent rate cut when they cut it 50 basis points, sparking concerns that the central bank may be losing control over the long end of the yield curve. I've said this before, I think this was a premature rate cut of the 50 basis points back then, and the most recent 25 basis point cut is also also a bad deal, where now the federal funds rate, the overnight lending rate between banks that influences the 10-year Treasury note and other rates that are out there, is now in a range of 4.5 to 4.75%. But I mean, look, inflation is continued to exceed 2%, which is their long rate inflation target, which Jerome Powell continued to mention at his press conference. And so the loosening of monetary policy is premature here. And instead, they should be looking at, cutting their balance sheet, which is distorting the market throughout the economy. And they're not being able to affect the long end of this Treasury curve. And that's also indicative of maybe higher inflation in the future, or maybe they're too, they're too loose for so long, and they certainly were before they started their rate hiking regime. I still just think that the interest rates are too high. Okay, I know some of you may disagree with me, and I've had some friends that disagree with me as well. That's fine, but my big point here, going back to Friedman, is we got to look at the money supply. We got to look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, high-powered money, if you will. That is really what's driving a lot of this uncertainty, the inequality, just the economic stagnation in so many areas of our economy. No matter what the report's telling us, this is really what the facts are on the ground, and the election was a big indicator of that, okay? So I'm going to leave it there, but I think there's more stuff to talk about. The Federal Reserve is getting a lot of things wrong, and we've got to make sure that we call balls and strikes, okay? Number 3, eliminating property taxes. In the news, North Dakota voters rejected Measure 4, a ballot initiative that would have eliminated property taxes statewide. If passed, North Dakota would have become the first U.S. state without property taxes, potentially setting a new standard for tax reform across the country. The potential of Measure 4, while it ultimately failed, it's a bold approach that sparked a critical discussion that's needed about tax reform and challenges the idea that property taxes must be a permanent part of our tax system. This moment demonstrated the public's growing interest in rethinking traditional tax structures, okay? Property taxes are a burden on homeownership. In fact, you've got to keep paying the property tax, or what's going to happen? You're going to lose your home. So you don't have the right to your home. If you don't have right to your property, then we're losing out here, America. Okay, this is not a good situation. And I know that some of my friends, maybe the Tax Foundation and some others, are saying, look, property taxes are not a terrible form of taxation. I just happen to disagree with them. I think this is a liberty issue, that property rights are so essential, and that property taxes are not a good form of taxation, where it's a tax on unrealized capital gains, as you tax it each and every year, even if the services that you're receiving from that local government are tied to the local community. You could do that through sales taxes. A final sales tax would be much better than any sort of local property tax. And look, states should be limiting their spending and buying down school maintenance and operation property taxes, which they mostly control already, okay? And then that would eliminate that over time. And then you should have local governments also have spending control through a local spending limit, kind of like Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and using their own surplus to buy down and eliminate their property taxes. And you don't have to change any other taxes. You could also broaden the sales tax base, maybe raise the rate a little bit, and allow for the state to then eliminate the school M&O, like keep paying for the school portion, which should be through education savings accounts, by the way, not these school finance formulas that are funding a monopoly government school system. But then you also have it to when you broaden the base, that also broadens the base for the local government sales taxes. And so any revenue that they receive, that should all go to reducing and eliminating their local property taxes. That way you have a distinction between what the state's doing, funding schools, and the local governments are doing all the local government stuff they have today. But all of that starts with whether you do the surplus trigger method or the broadening the base, the sales tax swap redesign, if you will. Either one of those has to go hand in hand with spending restraint. Because my other thing is, if we broaden the sales tax base and eliminate the school M&O property tax rate taxes altogether, is that then you can use the surplus trigger method by limiting state government spending and using surpluses to buy down the sales taxes over time. All right, so or eliminating the franchise tax in Texas or other states. There's a lot of things that you can do, but the key is let's make sure that we're eliminating things along the way. All right, so I'm sad to see that Measure 4 failed, but hopefully it gives us more ideas moving forward about what they can do, because I think that was a big problem with Measure 4 in North Dakota, was that they didn't have a good practical solution for what's going to happen with funding things thereafter once it got eliminated, okay? So the next point here is Texas poised for school choice win. In the news, following a successful election day for the Texas Republicans, it was a huge win in Texas, by the way. Ted Cruz beat Colin Allred really bad. It was a Democrat here, but also just in the state Senate and House, there were also big wins, mostly conservative. So we'll see how that goes. They always say they're Republican conservatives, but hopefully it really will be. But Governor Abbott has expressed confidence that there are enough enough votes to pass school choice legislation in the upcoming legislative session. We've got to empower Texas families. Parents should be able to decide where their kids are going to go. So instead of having some sort of voucher, we need education savings accounts and that go to kids no matter of their socioeconomic background, and that allow for families to use these universal savings accounts to select the schools that are going to align with their family's values and needs, and ultimately about education outcomes. If we focus on student outcomes instead of bureaucracy, we're going to be much better off. And that's what universal education savings accounts do. And it's a promising step forward that will allow us to have more economic growth, and teacher pay could increase and things of that nature as well. And also, we should be cutting spending here. Okay, stop funding the school finance formulas today. Move to ESAs for all schooling. That's way parents get to decide where they want to go, and that's where the funding would happen. Just like in competition, we need more free market capitalism, not socialism, within our education system. Okay, the next big issue: future of AI regulation. In the news, post-election predictions suggest a light regulatory approach toward AI from the Trump administration, though some states may take the initiative to introduce their own laws. What we're seeing is kind of a patchwork quilt, where different states are coming up with their own laws. Colorado has one, which is not a good one. Connecticut tried to have basically the same thing, but it was not a good one, and they actually killed it, which was great. Utah passed a bill that's better. It follows more of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council's model legislation. But basically, look, a lot of the rules for the game for AI are already on the books. Things that are illegal with AI should also be illegal what's going on today. And so I think we don't need a lot of new regulations. What we need is to make sure that the framework is such that we are allowing for innovation to take place, especially like small businesses and everything else. This is one of the big reasons why I have concerns about Texas draft AI bill. And I'm hopeful that Representative Capriglione, Senator Tam Parker can push to making it better by mainly rewriting it. This current bill should die. It's not a good bill at all. And it's something that should be scrapped. It's a Democrat bill out of Connecticut with Senator Maroney there, who's a Democrat. Why would we want a Democrat bill in Texas? We don't, okay? What we want is a way for entrepreneurship to succeed. Texas is known as Silicon Valley of the South. We don't want to be California, right? Because we're better than California in a lot of ways, lower taxes and everything else. We shouldn't be restricting AI. That's the future of our economy in so many ways, especially with so many small tech companies in Texas already and moving there. That's why it's called the Silicon Valley of the South. This would be a huge hit to a lot of those small businesses, because the penalties and other things associated with this bill would drive a huge hit to small businesses, while it would help, quote unquote, the big tech, which many in Texas seem to not like, especially more conservative politicians who are more populist in this sense. They're pushing them out. That's just a bad idea. There's also a lot of discrimination sort of issues going in this AI bill in Texas, which is like, I thought we were trying to get rid of DEI. Why are we trying to put more in there altogether? So, and I think there is a free market path, and I think AI is a big part of our future. Let's make sure that we're able to enhance it and not have a top-down government approach who is never going to have enough knowledge, like Hayek always said, to come up with the solutions. Instead, we should think about the trade-offs and therefore allow for people to prosper the most. So thanks for joining me in this episode of This Week's Economy. For more insights, visit vanceginn.com and get a paid subscription to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com to receive my insights right in your inbox and all the show notes. God bless you, and until next time, let people prosper.